So I'm Eric Budin. I didn't quite get the introduction that Michelle said at the beginning. My Dutch is not great yet, but I work on advanced advertising and data for Liberty. And what I'm going to talk about here is targeted advertising, a little bit more detail on what it is, some misconceptions about it, some use cases, and what we're seeing happen in the US. We actually don't have any stake in it ourselves, but we've talked to some of our colleagues, other MSOs, other providers in the US where targeting has taken place for a while. And then want to talk about how we can do something different here in NL and in Europe in general. So the idea of targeting, it's not new. It's been around for a while. The idea that advertising could be more effective if you reach exactly the right people. This is a quote from a US leader in retail from 100 years ago. I'm sure most people have seen some version of this quote at some point. Half the money I spend is wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half. So this predates anything we're talking about, predates TV. So who's doing well in terms of targeting? The best example, as John alluded to a couple of times, is online is ahead in a couple of key aspects. So let's compare online with TV on a couple of dimensions that are really important around targeting. First is the targeting itself. Obviously, in TV space, a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money is spent trying to reach the right audience. You figure out what shows, what their demographics are, marketers understand what they are, work with their agencies, and develop a media plan. With online, you literally just get the audience that you want. So even if you pick top gear and that's really high density of your target market, you're still having a lot of people who aren't in your target market. Second aspect is online is actually gone a step further. It's not just that you're getting the right people, you're finding out if they're truly interested. They have models where you can pay per click, pay per, even in some cases, pay all the way through purchase. And they also have started developing, when you look at YouTube and online video, customers can vote and say, I don't want to see this. Skip the ad, you have to wait a few seconds, but you can skip the ad. Advertisers don't pay for those people. They only pay for people who have somewhat opted in or at least chosen not to opt out. And the third aspect here, I couldn't agree more with what John said about the importance of data. You can't do these things unless you have data. And obviously we have some level of reporting on TV, and we can see who's watched what and top level demographics. You obviously have some issues around zero reporting and so forth. But it basically gets the job done. It helps make sure that we can have a currency for TV. But it doesn't really give insights to the advertisers or the programmers. What you see online is it's not just, hey, this segment broke out this way. It's who experienced it, what they did in terms of clicking through, not clicking through. You can add in behavioral aspects, and you have a whole slew of other demographics that you can add and really understand who's seeing your ads, what they're doing with it. And that last piece is really important. It's incredibly informative to an advertiser to know not just who saw the ad in pre-planning, but the ROI side. Being able to understand who responded, who didn't respond, and you get new insights. And you learn that, hey, there's this small micro segment that they didn't realize was very responsive to their product. All that is done with data, and it's all done in a responsive manner online. I want to go into a little more detail about what targeting is, because the basic concept of you get the audience you want, you don't get the audience you don't want, is only part of the story. So let's take a look. Some of these things are online's doing already. Advertising in general. If you look here, hopefully you can see this. At top are the people that you want. You've defined your target market appropriately. You have your prime market, which is your potential market toward the top. People who might be interested as you work your way down, and people who just are never going to be interested in your product. If you're selling cat food, you kind of need somebody to have a cat to be ultimately a customer. And the other axis is repetition. How many times you show that ad. So the obvious point is you want the ad going to the people who might have an interest in your product. The other part, though, that's really interesting here is there's a certain amount of reach, a certain amount of frequency that you want to be happening to each of the different segments here. You don't want any frequency with the bottom. You want a moderate amount in the middle, maybe tease people, maybe trying to expand your market. At the top, you want to hit these people, but you still don't want to hit them too many times. People will have negative affects for your product if they see it too often. I watch a lot of the Simpsons on TV everywhere with my kids. They have run for the last 3 months the same 2 Dodge commercials at every interstitial. I probably might not have been in the top for a Dodge, but the chances of me buying a Dodge at this point are almost 0. And they've lost the next generation also, because my kids are not buying a Dodge. So what targeting does is clearly you can do what I said before, you can get to the right audience. But you also can use things like frequency capping to understand, and you stop and you never get to the right-hand side here. You never get to the point where people are going to have a negative affect for your product. The other thing you can do is you can be really smart about having a sequential campaign. So build awareness for your product. Maybe the first 4 or 5 times somebody sees the ad, you have 1 ad. Once they've seen it, you either maybe try and close the sale, or you show a different use case of it, or eventually you may even show a different product that's complementary. All that can be done if you have the ability to target and you have good data about your customers. So I'm going to go through a couple of use cases here that highlight some of the different values to advertisers and the effectiveness of targeting. First one is there's a lawnmower company. They sell these big lawnmowers that you ride on. They understand what their audience is, their target customer. Again, like the cat, you need to have a big lawn to want to be able to ride your mower on. They said you have to have between 2 and 4 mowable acres. Anything more, you're probably hiring somebody. Anything less, you can just use a standard mower. It's a pretty expensive product, so you need to have a relatively high household income. By the way, these are all U.S. examples, so they're going to be in dollars. And they also, just the way that their distribution model works is you have to be within a certain geographic radius of one of their sales sites, just the logistics of fulfilling. And historically, it's one of the biggest lawnmower companies in the U.S., but they had a limited TV budget, but they were still spending a couple $1 million a year, and they were just doing traditional national cable. They could pick their spots. There's an ability to do some geo-targeting in the U.S., so they weren't totally wasting by advertising in New York City, but they were still hitting a lot of people that weren't part of their audience. So what they decided to do is take that couple million and they put it all into targeting. So they work with a couple of MSOs and satellite companies in the U.S. and they built up a plan. And when you take the target audience here, when you cut it by the mobile acres, when you cut it by income, when you cut it by the geo-targeting based on the dealers, of the 120 million homes in the U.S., there are really only 3.5 million that are their target audience. And what's really important, again, going back to the data point, what the MSOs have done there is they've taken their database of their customers with important aspects that they owned about the customer and third-party blind matched it with other data sets. So it's publicly available, how big these, through real estate transactions, how big these homes are. And you match it to the address, and you can find these things out. And unfortunately, you can find out all sorts of information. You can find out income. There's a big privacy issue here, and they do it anonymizing it, and they do third-party blind matches. But they're able to get to a very sophisticated target market. And they put 100% of their budget from normal traditional cable to targeted. And this is what they saw. So they started running the campaign, really blasting it, and it's also a very seasonal product. You sell more lawnmowers leading to the summer than you do in the winter. So they ran their campaign, and within the first 2 weeks, they had exceeded their web hits from the entire previous year. They had a record sales year, which is ultimately the biggest metric that you want for success here. And the only thing that really shifted, same product line, there is no other major shift. They didn't change their pricing. Nothing happened in terms of lawns growing faster in the US or anything. The biggest thing was that they had done targeting, and they were so happy with the results. They actually ran a campaign, first time they'd ever run a campaign toward the end of the year. Just, no pun intended, to seed the idea of lawnmowers for the following year. And they're now running all their advertising this year as addressable, and they've increased their budget. So we'll get back to this point again of what it means in aggregate for people to be able to target, but they were more effective, they spent their money more wisely, and they wound up spending more money. So let's go to another product. Let's take a broader appeal product, automobiles. So again, US company, they ran A/B testing. They matched it, so everything else was kept constant, and they ran half the group, and the A group was given target advertising, and the B group was given normal advertising. Just everybody was seeing the same thing. And what's interesting here is I'm going to show it to you at 3 levels here. The first level is in terms of just overall cars from the company. Whichever major car company this was, they were able to increase their sales 5.6% overall on their label. When you get into the subcategory of trucks, because the ad was targeted towards trucks, you see an even bigger lift. It goes up to 21%. And you get down to the model level, it goes up to 26%. So again, this is the only difference. And this is a lift in sales. So being able to have a dealership see a 26% increase in sales as a result of targeting. And again, I don't remember all the variables they used here, but one of the pieces of data that they have is what type of car you drive. They also have information about when your lease is up. So you can be extremely effective if you're smart about picking your target market and understanding what data is available. Third example is a little self-referential, but this is a case of a network using the information to target and promote their shows. So in the US, their channel CNBC, they show reruns of a show that runs on one of the major networks called Shark Tank. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. It's basically a semi-reality show where people pitch ideas to Mark Cuban and a couple of other VCs, and they decide whether they invest or they don't invest in it. One of the pieces of information that the MSOs are keeping, not only do they have their own information about their customers, not only are they marrying that with over 100 pieces of third-party data, they're also tracking what people watch. And again, there's privacy issues here, and there's a whole bunch of things they've done to protect anonymity here and to give people the ability to opt out. But they know who watched originally, the original airings of Shark Tank, because this runs on ABC. That really is the best possible audience for reruns of the show. So they advertise to those folks. They're able to anybody who's watched it within the last year, because I don't think they hold it longer than a year. The first time the episode ran, you look at the people, what the tune-in was, percentage of people who responded to the ads, 5.6% if they weren't targeted. So that's the ratings they got among their audience. People who had seen the ad campaign, I think we got cut off here a little at the bottom here, but I think it's like a 73% increase here. And what's interesting here is they accumulate how many people viewed it, and hey, it's one thing for one episode, the first episode, does that trail off over time? They actually tracked it for who watched any of the first 3 episodes cumulatively. So you add those up, and it's not to scale here, but you had the similar rise. I think it's one of these is 73%, one 71%. That's a huge increase. And you're able, because there's so few people, they're very efficient about the advertising. You just targeted the people who have an interest in this show. Again, this is something that we can think about for ourselves and using the data and figuring out how we take advantage of all of the data we have to pick the right audience and deliver results. Now, a couple of misconceptions around targeting that I want to talk about, and then explain what we're really seeing in the US. First misconception is that an individual advertiser, hey, if I can just cherry pick and get to the people who I want to advertise to, I'm going to spend less. Maybe this whole idea of selling waste is really good for the ad sales business. If we're selling people, we're getting rid of this, we're getting higher volumes, so they buy some things they don't need, maybe overall it's good for ad sales. Second myth is the idea, and I hadn't seen John's presentation before he went up here, but he talked a little bit about this. The idea of, hey, we can do all these sophisticated, great things if the total amount of money that's allocated to TV is fixed. We're just rearranging chairs here. We're just, if anything, we're just adding a technology tax if that pool is fixed. We don't believe it is. So when John talked about a couple of the points, I'll underscore those. That's more of a macro point. The other one is a matter of pure economics, and we can dig in on that one right here. So the important thing to think about is, there's different terms for this, but we call it an eCPM. What are you, for the inventory that you have, how are you filling that? How are you selling it? What does it mean for your total spend, or your total monetization, rather? So let's take the really simple base case. So you sell a single spot to a single advertiser, and you get 10 euro CPM. Pretty straight math calculation. Your effective CPM there is 10 euros. I'm going to take a second example here. There's a number of different types of targeting. We didn't get into all the details here, but one of them that's effective is going back to a car dealer. What they could do is they could take the same spot, so they have the entire spot, and they show a different ad. If it's VW, they show some people the Passat, you show some people the Jetta, you show some people the Touareg. Still the same spot, still the same advertiser, but they've become more effective because they've promoted the car to the right audience. So in that case, for the targeting, they would pay a premium. So because they're able to do that, the CPM goes from 10 euros, there's a 150% premium, and I'm going to get to what the multiples we're seeing actually are. So that's actually a conservative premium. You wind up with a 25 euro CPM. I don't think anybody thought they were going to go to math class here, but we're keeping the numbers here pretty straightforward. The last one, though, is more complicated. So what happens when you have inventory and you slice it up and you're selling some of it, you're selling, in the case before, 5% of it to the lawnmower company. You're selling another part. Amex wants to get people who are their gold card holders and tell them about their benefits. And you work your way down, and you're splitting and you're slicing it. You wind up with a blended rate. So in this case, again, you'd have, based on whatever the cuts are, you'd have different ads running, different people are seeing them, and they're different advertisers. This is complicated. This is where you have to have a system. You can't do this manually. You have to have an inventory planning system to make this happen. But once you put that in place, you see that there's a big chunk of it that you're getting super premiums for. This is the lawnmower. This is the Amex. There's a medium that you're getting on the basic demographics. Somebody wants to do women, or they want to do something about geography, or they want to do something about income level. Those aren't that sophisticated. There's a moderate premium for those. And then you do wind up with some remnant here. There's some, when you slice and dice, no matter how effective you are, there's going to be some that has to be sold at a discount. And you have to factor that in. It's really important that you have a planning tool to be able to do that, because it's a bad economic move if you sell just the 3% to the lawnmower company and you have to sell everything out at a distressed discount. You have to plan that, and you can balance that across inventories. You have to trust me on the math that this works, that you wind up in that situation. Somebody's actually doing the calculation here. I appreciate that. Tell me if I'm wrong. You wind up at 32 euros as an effective CPM. That's the number that matters. It doesn't matter that you got this huge premium on the 3% if you don't handle it well across the entire inventory. That's really important. That's why people like Sky, that people in the US are building very, very sophisticated systems. So going back to the original first myth, if you do this well, if you have individual advertisers that are thinking this way, and a great example is you have the lawnmower company who, I got right? Okay. The individual lawnmower company, not only did they increase the CPM that they're spending, they increase the total amount they're spending because it's more effective, and they realize that, hey, let's put more of our TV budget, or more of our total advertising budget, rather, into TV. What it also does is you, as the people who own the inventory, you have a whole bunch of inventory that you're free to sell to whomever you want, because they're buying less, paying more for it, and spending more total. And you have all of this inventory. You have to be smart about it. You have to figure out how you use it so it doesn't become remnant. But you have an ability to sell that real estate again. Let's talk about the second myth. This is the more macro myth, and John made a couple of the points I'm going to make here already, so I'm just going to underscore those. There are other big pools that we can go after. We've seen it shift the other way, where people are allocating some of their TV budget to online. We have the ability to pull some of these pools. First of all, we have the ability to stem some of the online, but we also have the ability to pull in some new pools, some of which John mentioned. What's really interesting, because we have a lot of numbers that are coming from the US, and we've done these comparisons. In the US, they've had the ability to target, they call them ad zones, but it's basically geo-targeting at a reasonable level. Like a city like Philadelphia would have 20 different ad zones. So they have the ability already to appeal to some of the people that are going to Sky. A local business can advertise with them. They've had this for 25, 30 years. We haven't really had that here in Europe and NL and most of the other countries. What that means is that there are businesses, other media, which has been somewhat artificially boosted, outdoor, direct mail, radio, newspaper, because they don't have competition for this more hyper-local from TV. So I'm going to show this chart here, which shows the media split in the US, and I'm going to compare it to the EU. You see the white is the internet. You've seen that's been increasing. It's been mostly increasing not at the expense of TV. TV has been dropping modestly in terms of share, but overall things have been growing, so it's been mostly flat. When you look over at the EU, you see, first of all, biggest thing is TV is less here, and it's mostly less because things like outdoor and newspapers, and it's not even on here, but direct mail are much more widely used here. And what's interesting is when you look at the CPMs, we're not stealing, or we're not going to be pulling from low CPM areas. Direct mail gets the highest CPM out there. Newspapers are while they're shrinking in terms of their total revenues, their CPMs are still very good. There's an opportunity to get advertisers who want to spend or are willing to spend for the right audience and have them come into TV. So what's actually happening in the US? The US number of both cable companies and satellite companies have been launching target advertising really over the last 3-4 years, but in earnest, it's really happened over the last year and a half. So I'll tell you what's happening, and then we're going to go through some of the results. So Comcast was one of the first people to launch targeted. They did it just on VOD to start with. They also had to have linear addressable. Comcast is the largest U.S. cable company, around 25 million subs. Cablevision, mostly focused in New York, very, very desirable audience, about 3 million subs. They were the first ones really to go out with linear addressable, which is, because of the timely nature of running the ads, is a little bit more complicated. The two major satellite companies in the US both have around 15 million subs apiece. They've both launched linear. They don't really have a big VOD business, so it's linear from the start with them. They're also running a data business, as Cablevision is. And the data business is actually providing some of those insights that John talked about, using the cable data to provide insights to advertisers, either in their planning or in terms of ROI reporting post-ad. And John talked about AdSmart, launched, been working on it for about 6 years. They launched in earnest about a year ago. What they're doing, though, is it's really important. It's not true targeting. They're doing it by postal code. So you can pick a postal code, and you can pick a postal code that over-indexes for a certain demographic, but you can't quite get your demographic. Maybe they get there at some point. They're not quite there yet. Here are the results. So a lot of this information has been given to us in confidence. Two of the folks here are making over $100 million a year just in targeted advertising. And again, this has been up in earnest for just a little bit over a year. So this is real money. And the CPM lifts that they're seeing, the first couple times we started to hear this, we thought people were exaggerating, a salesperson was bragging. But we've triangulated this through a couple of sources. The cable companies who they had the advantage, they were able to get to that first level of targeting on the ad zones that the satellite folks hadn't been able to do. They've seen a 3 to 10x lift. 3 to 10x, that's just seems amazing. The satellite guys are even seeing more than that. 5 to 30 time lifts in CPM. And maybe this will go down a little bit over time, as there's obviously some self-selection that's going in here, but those are pretty amazing numbers. Sky, again, 6 years, 100 million pounds. What they're seeing is not only are they making a lot of money here, 21 million pounds, but they're also, as John had a slide on, 77% of the advertisers are new to Sky. Our numbers aren't exactly the same, but they've talked about 22% of their advertisers being totally new to TV. So this talks to the point about expanding the pie, pulling from different pools. I have a couple minutes here. So on the CPM, this is another way of looking at it. You have going from the normal untargeted to the zone targeted to addressable, where you see a huge lift. And what's important is this is early days. There's some folks who are testing here. You're obviously getting the people who targeting means the most to. But you look at what's happened with online as an analog here. This has been sustained. It's a 3 to 4x lift in CPMs for being able to target it. It's just more effective for an advertiser. So how do we do this? This is really important, because one of the things you have in the US, this has happened in the US and it's happened in Sky because they have the inventory. We're in a different situation here. We don't have inventory. We think the way that ad sales are done today is very effective. We're not trying to get into that business. How do we work together? So you can look at the value chain that we have today. An advertiser works with a creative agency. They figure out where to put it in. The sales channel comes in. We've had a couple of things that have already been affecting this. John talked about what's happening in terms of some more sophisticated tools. You have the DSPs. You have the SSPs. You're already starting to work with those. The media agencies are working with those. What we have to get to is pull in what the providers can do. Get to targeting. Get to customer preferences. We can find out what people are doing, what they want to receive, what information we have about our customers, and then we can also get to reporting. So the sophisticated planning reporting and the reporting after the fact, where you can actually calculate an ROI. How many people actually bought a product? We can marry customer database with, again, customer giving permission. We can marry that with actual shopping data to understand, if you ran a targeted ad, was it effective in lifting detergent sales or whatever it is? So there's a lot of money out here. I'm going to close is my last slide. We're an industry where things are going well, but there is a threat of online. There are things that online is doing better. How do we pivot and, instead of just thwarting this, turn this to our advantage? So I started with a quote from a US businessman from 100 years ago. I'm going to end with another one. This is John Rockefeller. He founded Standard Oil. It was the first company to ever get sued for antitrust. They owned the kerosene market in the US. They dominated it. At the beginning of last century, it was under threat from Edison and electricity, and what can he do? People are starting to use light bulbs instead of kerosene. There was this runoff from his processing called gasoline. Didn't know what it was. They were just dumping it in the rivers because it had no use. He basically worked with industry to find what can we do to create something with the gasoline. He was basically the first hackathons working with these developers, and he figured out this is a great way to power the engines. And we think of the data that we have, and we think about the targeting capabilities here as something that can really power our engine and be our gasoline. And that's it. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you.